Thanks for tuning in. You're listening to Gnostic Studies. And today we're going to do the fourth class of our Introduction to Gnostic Psychology series, which is internal states and external events. Really, it's talking about the differentiation between what's going on in the outside world and what's going on in the internal world. That's why it's called attitude and character, because we want to see how to observe our internal state, which we could call our attitude. But before we jump into today's material, let's just do a quick overview of what we talked about in the previous 3 classes. We talked about the Gnostic perspective of the universe, and that the Gnostic, at least in the system that we're studying, sees the universe as conscious, as aware, and when we have the point of view that many modern scientists submit from, we referenced Rupert Sheldrake's book, The Science Delusion, where he says that scientists have a dogma, and one of the dogmas is related with how the universe is unconscious. So if we say that about the universe, since we're human beings and we form a part of the universe, we are also inside the universe, that implies that we too are unconscious. And as Gnostics, we disagree with that. There's the possibility of being conscious, the possibility of awakening our consciousness. And that process is through discovering the aspects of ourselves that are asleep, the parts of ourselves that are asleep, psychologically speaking. And so that's why we said in the second class that if we want to acquire knowledge of ourselves, if we want to study ourselves, if we want to acquire knowledge of ourselves, then we need to study ourselves. And if we want to study ourselves, then we need to observe ourselves. Self-observation. The observation of the interior world, of what's going on inside of us. And so we began making that differentiation in these classes about the exterior and the interior, external world and the internal world. And we mentioned a quote from Samael Aun Weor where he says that the interior world is more real to us than the exterior world, because our thoughts and feelings can be more intense for us than a chair or a desk or something in the exterior world. We live with them more. So we want to learn how to make a differentiation between the external and the internal. And we're going to look at that more today. But in our third class, we talked about the human machine, the idea that our organism is a machine that's able to transform energies that are coming from the cosmos, the air that we breathe, the food that we eat. We're able to transform these energies and convert them into another type of energy. So we can convert matter from one type into another type. We can convert energy from one type into another type. And that's called the human machine. And then we have 3 brains or plexuses in esoteric anatomy, which is the intellectual brain, the emotional brain, and the action brain. So we talked all about that in the third class, and we gave definitions for that so that you can know it better. And it's important to make the differentiation, because now when we're studying ourselves, when we're observing ourselves, that's what we're observing. Our thoughts, our feelings, our actions. And our actions can be broken down into sensations and movements. We want to observe those and not see ourselves as them. We don't want to see ourselves as our thoughts. We don't want to see ourselves as our feelings or our sensations. We want to see the human machine as giving us certain inputs, and then we, as a consciousness, as an intelligence, are the essence, which is like a spark of divinity that exists in the physical form right now inside of a human machine, inside of a human organism that it's able to use and walk around and or talk or whatever our ability is. And we want to take advantage of that opportunity that we have right now as a human machine, as an essence in a human organism. And the way that we take advantage of that is by not confusing the external and the internal, not allowing the thoughts, the feelings, and sensations to dominate us, but instead to see them as input coming in through the machine. What we choose to do, how we react, the actions that we do, the way we handle our internal world is really what we're going to talk about today. Attitude and character. So let's jump into today's material and and we'll go from there. And if you have questions, you're welcome to drop them into the comment area, or you can wait until the end and we'll open it up and we'll review the questions at that time. In the field of practical life, we discover astonishing contrasts. Wealthy people with a magnificent residence and with many friends sometimes suffer terribly, while humble middle-class people often live in complete happiness. Many multi-millionaires suffer from sexual impotence, and rich matrons cry bitterly due to their husbands' infidelities. Let's study this situation in more detail. The physical body is one of the marvelous instruments which the human being possesses in order to express itself. Many times we meet people who radiate an attitude of bliss, happiness, health, optimism, sympathy, love, etc. These people win the friendship of everyone. They possess a force of attraction, a magnet. They are irresistible. Others are weak and lack that magnet, which is so marvelous. They fail when they try to receive the help of others. And when they are owners of a business, their clients gradually leave them. This magnet is related with a person's attitude and character. And Gnostic psychology proposes that a person's attitude and character depend upon their internal state. A person's attitude and character do not develop in the physical body, but are expressed through it. In 1001 phrases, we indicate the importance of right attitude. I approached it in the wrong attitude. His attitude was all wrong. You'll have to change your attitude if you want to get ahead. A proper attitude is needed, and so on. What do we mean by attitude? We mean the general state of the person relative to the object, or specifically, their emotional state in regards to the object. If a man feels suspicious about an object, then his attitude is one of suspicion. If he feels fear, affection, trust, hope, etc., then his attitude corresponds. Whatever the emotion evoked in us by the object, the attitude is determined by it. Can we change our attitude towards things? Obviously, our attitude can be changed for us by circumstances. Okay, what's an example of this? Somebody says, do you have some money to spare? And we say no. And then they say, they pull out a weapon and they say, give me your wallet, or give me your purse, give me your money. Maybe our attitude before, where we were like, no, I don't want to give this person our money, maybe now our attitude is like, yeah, you can have all my money because I would prefer not to be physically harmed. You know, that's just sort of a superficial example. There's other examples. So reflect on this. Our attitude can be changed by circumstances. But the question is, can we change our attitude towards things? So the external world can change our internal state. We can allow the external world to affect us so that we change our internal state. Right? Let's say we went to the store, we bought something to drink, and then we bought a lottery ticket, and we won some money. Maybe that external situation changed our attitude. But can we change our attitude without a change in the external world? Without a change in circumstances? In regard to most objects and persons, our attitudes, in fact, change almost from day to day. One day we like so-and-so very much, and we are disposed to act in a certain way towards them. But the next day, owing to some change in them, or in circumstances affecting ourselves, our attitude has changed, and we are cool where before we were warm. Observation of ourselves will easily show how infinitely changeable we are in our attitudes, that is to say, in our emotional responses to things. Observation of ourselves will show us this. This is not something that we should just accept because it's in a book, or because somebody is reading it over the internet. But we can see this by observing ourselves, that we change. One day we're friendly towards somebody, another day we're mean towards them, you know. But the question is, can we change our attitude voluntarily, at our own discretion, without the stimulus of a change in the object, without the external world changing? Obviously we can, right? It's got to be possible. If we could do that, then we would be on the way to becoming masters of our fate, since circumstances can affect us only as much as we are affectable. If we can adopt any attitude we choose, if we can have any emotion we decide, then whatever happens is all the same to us. And then we can feel about it as we please. For instance, when we find an attitude, according to some situation or person, too painful to continue, then we try to change the object. And failing that, we change our internal state in regards to it. There's a fairy tale related with the fox and the grapes, which is applicable here. The fox tries in vain to obtain the grapes. They're too high up. He's unable to get them. And so he persuades himself, instead of that he was unable to get them, and so he needs to work on his jumping or whatever, he persuades himself that the grapes are sour, and he doesn't want them anyway. By imagining the grapes to be sour, the fox induced a different emotion or attitude in itself. And now it no longer perceived the grapes as it had perceived them before. The practical conclusion to be drawn is that our perspective is the means by which our attitude can be controlled. Perspective is the means by which our attitude can be controlled. Now, obviously, we're talking about work on ourselves. But if you understand, this can also be used by others to manipulate us. If others choose to give us a specific perspective and emphasize that perspective and sort of create a narrative where that's the only perspective of seeing things, then that can be a way to attempt to mold our attitude. So we should be aware of our perspective, because that is the means by which our attitude can be controlled. We're talking about working on ourselves, about learning to change our perspective of things so that we can change our attitude in regards to them. Our emotions are evoked by our perspective, and to the extent that our perspective is under our control, our emotions and attitudes are as well. It is clear that the dominant attitude of our lives is our attitude or emotional response towards life itself. This colors everything. So now we're talking about our dominant attitude. The attitude that we most often take on. Because we're bouncing back and forth between this idea that we need to control our own attitude and what happens when we don't. When we allow others to control it, or when we allow the machine to run and do whatever it wants. As we commonly say, some see everything through rose-colored glasses. Others have a gloomy outlook on life. Others again have a serious or a happy-go-lucky or a religious or a sporty attitude. For so many people, there can be just as many attitudes, although all can be reduced to a definite number of groups or categories. And in every case, one's dominant attitude determines every subordinate attitude. Let's understand this. The dominant attitude determines our subordinate attitude. For instance, if your characteristic attitude towards life is gloomy, then even your occasional moods of cheerfulness will be affected. They will be, in all probability, both intense and brief. Or if your dominant attitude is festive and reckless, then your moments of depression may be profound, but not long-lasting, because you return to your dominant attitude. Practically all preaching, whether religious or secular, we could even say political, and all teaching, whether institutional or personal, has for its real objective the inducement of a changed attitude towards life. Equally, most of the traditional systems of therapy, including Christian Science and psychoanalysis, aim consciously or unconsciously to bring about a change of heart or attitude in their pupils and patients. So all-important has it been found in its effects upon the organism as a whole, that practically every method aimed at betterment must begin with correcting the attitude towards life. Attitude, as we can see, is conditioned by perspective. What you perceive a thing to be, you also feel it to be, whether this is something imagined or it really truly is. If you perceive a coiled rope laying on the path to be a snake, then you will feel and act accordingly. When you discover your mistake and have a different view of the rope, a different perspective of it, then your emotional attitude will change. So what is our perspective of life? What do we take it to be? Is it for us a coiled rope? Or do we perceive it as a snake? Some people say that it is impossible to know for certain what life is, but in that case, then we're free to imagine it or to perceive it to be whatever we please. And it is only common sense to perceive it to be something useful to us. Life is something useful to us, is the perspective that Gnosis is trying to present. All religious and similar systems aim, in short, at inducing in us a useful attitude towards life. An attitude, that is, in which we can act freely and usefully in regards to our own ends or to somebody else's. Some religious systems, for instance, try to induce an attitude of submission towards life, with the design of making use of us for their own advantage. Others aim at evoking an active or creative attitude towards life in us, with the objective of enlisting our voluntary cooperation. And all alike proceed by a common method, namely, by changing our perspective of life. We can name a few typical life pictures, each, be it remembered, drawn to evoke its proper emotions, attitude, and consequent conduct. Each perspective is designed to evoke an attitude or emotional response useful to somebody or other, either to the teachers and preachers or to their students and congregations. It may be that each view, in its own way, is useful, but there can be little doubt that for most of us, in our modern times, the image of life as a gymnasium is a greatly needed tonic. So we talked about seeing life as something useful to us. Now we want to see it as a gymnasium. And now we're going to explain why. Life and gymnastics. Compare your attitude, or the difference in your emotional response, upon entering a gymnasium versus entering, let's say, a nightclub, or a lecture hall, or a funeral home. Try to realize what and how you actually feel in your attitude when you enter the gym versus a nightclub, or a lecture hall, or a funeral home. When you are prepared, you have the intention of strengthening yourself, and you delight in the difficulties, provided you choose them yourself. So, when we want to go to the gym, to work out, to exercise, then we have a certain type of attitude. We're going there to get strong, to strengthen ourselves. In short, you feel at your strongest, and you are working to get stronger. The classic Greek conception of life was just that, and the gymnasium, with its lectures and discussions, as well as physical exercises, was the most popular institution of Pythagorean Greece. What is not so well known is that the gymnasium was, for the Greeks, a symbol of life itself. The gods ran this planet as a gymnasium for the exercise of human beings, and all experiences were to be taken as movements, turns, stretches, or exercises in wrestling, running, lifting, and so on. modern people will find what the ancient Greeks found in this view of life: the evocation of a creative emotion. A creative emotion. Remember, emotion is related with attitude. It is difficult to see in what other direction modern people can look for a new perspective and therefore a new attitude towards life. The clean, strong idea of life as a field of exercise for the development of all our muscles, physical, emotional, and intellectual, has a very special quality of idealism. And life lived in that attitude will certainly be interesting as well as profitable. We're living in this world for some purpose, for something, for some special reason. Obviously, there is much in us that we must see, study, and comprehend if indeed we want to know something about ourselves, about our own life, if that is what we long for. The existence of the one who dies without having known the purpose of their life is tragic. Each one of us must discover for ourselves the purpose of our own life. Clearly, there is something within us that makes our life bitter. And this is what we need to firmly struggle against. In order to do this, we must discover what keeps us trapped within the prison of pain. There are people imprisoned in their dogmas and beliefs, people petrified in the memories of many yesterdays, individuals full of ancestral prejudices, persons who are slaves of what others might say, horrible, lukewarm, indifferent people, know-it-alls, who are convinced that they are right because that is what they were told, etc. Those people do not want to understand that this world is a psychological gymnasium through which it is possible to annihilate that secret ugliness that we all carry within. If those people comprehended the unfortunate state within which they dwell, then they would tremble with horror. Nonetheless, such people think the best of themselves. They boast of their virtues. They feel they are perfect, generous, helpful, noble, charitable, intelligent, responsible, etc. Practical life as a school is tremendous. But to take it as a goal in itself is manifestly absurd. Those who take life in itself, as it is lived daily, have not comprehended the necessity of working upon themselves in order to achieve a radical transformation. Unfortunately, people live mechanically and have never heard anything about the interior work. Change is necessary, but people do not know how to change. They suffer greatly, but they do not even know why they suffer. Can you note the difference between your own life and life in general? What do you mean by the term my life? As when you say, my life has been a happy life, or my life has been an unhappy life. Do you mean that outside things have been pleasant or unpleasant? Or are you talking about inside things? That your moods and feelings and so on have been pleasant or unpleasant? Sometimes a person who is in a good external situation in life, with enough money and with pleasant surroundings and without any serious trouble, is unhappy and miserable. And on the other hand, a person in a very different and even adverse circumstances is often quite the reverse. They're happy. Let's look at this situation more closely. What is one's life? When people wish to tell the story of their lives, they speak of events, of other people, of external things. But one's life consists of two distinct things, which for the purpose of self-observation must be realized. One's life consists not only of events, but also of states. States are internal, and events are external. States are states of oneself. They are internal states. They are within oneself. All states are states of ourselves. Events, on the other hand, are external. They come to us from the outside. It is necessary to try to see that states and events are two different things. First of all, before thinking of how they may be connected together. We need to know what life is. Everyone is free to think as they like. But regardless of what people say, life seems to be a problem that no one understands. As we have said, when people want to tell us the story of their life, they quote events, first names, last names, dates, etc. They feel satisfied when telling their stories. These unfortunate people ignore that their stories are incomplete, because events, names, and dates are merely the outer aspect of their life. The inner aspect is missing from these stories. It is urgent to know the states of consciousness, because each event is complemented with this or that psychological state. Remember that states are internal, and the events are external. External events are not everything. Let's understand that internal states are good or bad disposition, preoccupation, depression, superstition, fear, suspicion, mercy, self-commiseration or self-pity, overestimation of oneself or of others, underestimation of oneself or of others, states of happiness, states of pleasure, etc. So, since those are all examples of internal states can correspond perfectly with external events. They can be originated by external events. Right? Like when we went to buy a drink and then we bought a lottery ticket and then now we won the lottery, now we feel happy. So we could say that because we have money, that's what makes us happy. Because that's how some people live. Or internal states can have no relationship at all with external events. In every case, states and events are different. They're two separate things. Events do not always correspond exactly to compatible states. A pleasant event could be unrelated with its internal state. An unpleasant event could be unrelated with its internal state. When a long-awaited for event finally arrives, we often feel that something is missing. Certainly the corresponding internal state, which should have been combined with the external event, was what was missing. Many times the unexpected event comes to be the one that has provided us with the best moments. Take, for instance, a pleasant event. Does your inner state correspond with it? Can you say for certain that when the outer event occurs, your inner state will correspond with it? Say you know some desirable event is going to happen, and you look forward to it. Let's say you're having a party or something. Can you say that when it comes about, that your inner state can meet this external event, this party, in a delightful way? Or will you admit that although the event happens, perhaps even as you had hoped and planned, something is often lacking? What is lacking? The corresponding internal state to combine with the external event that was so eagerly anticipated. And as you probably know, it is usually the entirely unexpected event that gives us our best moments. Let's take this idea, the correspondence of internal states and external events. Unless we have the right internal state within ourselves, it is not possible to combine with the event, whether it be happy or sad. Yet people very much are inclined, in thinking of their lives, to believe that their lives are only external events. And that if a certain number of external events of one kind or another had or hadn't happened to them, then their lives would have been better or worse. But a person's capacity for life depends on their inner development. That is, on the quality of their internal states. A person's capacity for life depends on their inner development. Right? That psychological gymnasium, that work that they've been doing internally. Because internally, concerning our states, is the apparatus for living. And if this apparatus is, for example, swamped by self-pity and worries and other negative emotions, then no matter how delightful the outer events are, nothing can happen properly. And this is simply because the apparatus for living, that is, the person in themselves, is quite unable to combine in a fortunate way with such events that come from the exterior world, which might give them some pleasure and delight. A man maybe looks forward to a trip. Maybe he's going to another country. And when it comes about, the trip is an event. But that man may be so mean, so careful about small, unimportant things, that the whole trip is nothing but a disaster. And in such a case, it will be that the man's internal state is what is at fault. So if we ask ourselves what our life consists of, we cannot simply say events, but that it consists far more of states. To correctly combine internal states with external events is to know how to live intelligently. Any event intelligently lived demands its specific corresponding internal state. Nonetheless, when people review their lives, they only think it is made up of external events. They think that if this or that event had or hadn't happened to them, then their lives would have been better. Oh, if I had just won the lottery, or if I had just said something to this person, or maybe if I just hadn't said anything to that person. Right? This is how we think when we think about our lives. People think that fortune came to meet them, yet they lost the opportunity to be happy. They regret what they lost. They cry about what they hate. They moan when remembering their old errors and calamities. Yet, the capacity to consciously exist depends exclusively on the interior qualities of the soul. Interior states of the soul. Certainly, it does not matter how beautiful the external event might be. If we're not in the appropriate internal state in those moments, then the best moments can even seem boring to us. Someone anxiously awaits the wedding dinner as a great event. Nevertheless, it could happen that they could be so preoccupied in that precise moment that they would really not enjoy it at all, and that party would become for them as dry and cold as protocol. Experience has taught us that not all persons who attend a banquet or a party really enjoy themselves. A bored person is always present at the best parties. And the most delightful music makes some people happy and makes others cry. It is very rare to find someone who knows how to consciously combine internal states and external events. It is unfortunate that people do not know how to live consciously. They cry when they should laugh, and laugh when they should cry. Control is different. The sage, the wise person, can be happy, but never filled with an insane frenzy, or sad, but never desperate and discouraged. They're calm in the middle of violence, abstinent amidst drunkenness, chaste when facing lust, etc. Every day we see people that are not only unhappy, but what is even worse, they make other people's lives miserable. Such people will not change even if they were to get what they think they want, because they carry the psychological disease within them. What they carry within them are damaging internal states. Damaging internal states. Nevertheless, they often classify themselves as correct, holy, virtuous, noble, accommodating, etc. They're individuals who are always looking for loopholes in order to evade their own responsibilities. Persons like this are accustomed to inferior emotions. And as a result, it is obvious that they create unhelpful psychological elements on a daily basis. Disgraceful events like the setback of fortune, misery, debts, problems, etc., are the exclusive property of those persons who do not know how to live consciously and intelligently. Those who learn how to consciously combine external events with internal states march on the path of success. Suppose that a man whose chief love is to be pessimistic and gloomy complains to you that life is a bad business and not worth living. Will you suppose that this is caused by a lack of suitable events? Or has it been caused by that man's internal state or states? And would you be so silly as to think that by arranging a nice party for him that he will change? The disease is in the man himself, and every day many people make their own life and the lives of others miserable owing to their wicked internal states. So, in self-observation, we want to try to distinguish between outer events and internal states. And notice where you're standing, both in relation to your inner state and to the nature of the outer event. External events are of any kind. Outer life is not a smooth sheet of paper that we're crawling over like ants. It's full of hills and valleys, good weather and bad weather, ups and downs. This is the nature of life. But as a rule, we take all events as exceptional, or at least the unpleasant ones, such as illness, war, economic problems. And inner states are, again, of every kind. All personal work is about internal states, and one must work on wrong states, trying not to identify with them. If you work on these wrong states and try to separate yourself from them, then the unpleasant events of life will not catch you so easily and be able to draw force from you, that is, take your energy. Events are influences, changing at every moment in their various combinations. Some are better than others, but all have to be taken consciously, even the good ones, and some of them are very dangerous and must not be identified with at all costs. From what has been said, it will become clearer that one's life is more to be thought of as one's internal states. And a true history of one's life would be a history of one's inner states and of negative emotions especially. Therefore, this work begins with self-observation and by noticing wrong states in oneself and working against them. In this way, the inner life becomes purified, and since our inner life attracts our outer life, the magnet that we mentioned at the beginning, then by changing our internal state, starving some states and nourishing others, we also alter not only our relation to events, which are coming from the outside, how we handle them, but we even alter the nature of the events that come to us day by day. Only in this way can we change the nature of events that happen to us. We cannot change them directly, but only through changing states, that is, through beginning to put this disorderly house into order. It is not the events of today that happen to you that matter, like that you lost something, or something went wrong, or someone forgot you, or spoke to you harshly, or you got a raise, or a bunch of likes on social media or whatever. It's not the events that matter, but how you reacted to it all. Which means what states of yourself you were in. For it is here that your real life is. And if our inner states were right, then nothing in the nature of external events could overcome us. Therefore, try to distinguish, as an exercise in living more consciously, between internal states and external events. And try to meet any outer event, after noticing its nature, with the right inner attitude, with the appropriate internal state. So if we want to observe ourselves, then we must differentiate between exterior events from practical life and the interior states of the consciousness. The work upon oneself refers to the diverse psychological states of the consciousness. No one can deny that we carry many errors and incorrect internal states within ourselves. And if we really want to change, then we need to radically modify those erroneous states of our own consciousness. The modification of these interior states will cause a transformation of our character. And as a result, we will attract new circumstances to our lives. This occurs because the modification of internal states originates completely different transformations in the field of practical life. If, however, we do not work on ourselves, then we will always be the victim of circumstances, a victim of our own reaction to the external events. The key to changing our lives is changing ourselves. We can change our circumstances as much as we want, but if we do not change ourselves, then we will continue attracting the same circumstances, the same external events to our lives. Remember, what we're saying is that our attitude is a magnet that attracts things to us or repels things from us. Events change, they combine together and come one after another like waves. They are obviously good and bad events. Some events are better than others, but we can always learn something from an event. To modify some events is possible, but there are others which are beyond our control and must be consciously accepted even when they become dangerous and even painful. But the pain disappears when we do not identify ourselves with the problem that has arisen, because we see it as a way to strengthen ourselves. The psychological gymnasium. When we change our perspective and therefore our attitude. We must consider life as a series of successive interior states. When reviewing the totality of our existence, we can verify for ourselves that many unpleasant situations were possible thanks to wrong interior states. The best weapon that a human being can use in life is a correct psychological state. One can disarm beasts and unmask traitors by means of appropriate internal states. Wrong internal states convert us into defenseless victims of human perversity. We must learn to face the most unpleasant events of practical life with an appropriate internal uprightness. We must not identify ourselves with any event. Remember that everything passes away. Learn to look at life like a movie. Thus, you will receive the benefits. Do not forget that events without any value could bring us disgrace if we do not eliminate mistaken internal states from our psyche. Unquestionably, each external event needs its appropriate payment. That is, its precise psychological state, the correct internal state. Because when we learn to combine the proper internal state with the external event, then we handle the situation in the best way possible. So that's why at this stage, class number 4, we're asking for your self-observation to be directed towards your internal state, your attitude when facing things, your attitude throughout the day, your attitude when someone talks to you well or when someone talks to you poorly. How do we handle those things? Do we allow external events to control us, to push us like driftwood on the ocean? Or do we have that internal uprightness that allows us to handle no matter what happens and maintain control of our own attitude? So that's the end of the material we wanted to present to you today. So now we open it up for questions and comments. If you guys have any, please feel free to drop them into the comment area there. We want to invite you to meditation tomorrow at the same time. It's 7:30 Mountain Time, but whatever time it may be for you. We got a question here. Here's a question. I recall you saying that retention of sexual fluids is important for males. If one loses their fluids in their sleep, is this also to be taken as an external event, seeing as it directly impacts our spiritual progress? Interesting question. So we don't just retain the sexual energy, we need to transmute it to bring it from the sexual organs up the spine into the brain. And so the question is, if one has a wet dream, is this taken as an external event? It is an external event. And so we have to look at our internal state that happens. What is our internal state in regards to it? How do we handle it? How do we look at it? But it does, as you mentioned, directly impact our spiritual progress. The creative energy, when we learn to handle it, to manage it, is marvelous. And it's not just males that need to work with the creative energy in this system of Gnosis that we're studying. It's anyone. We all need to work with the creative energy and avoid the spasm, avoid the loss of the energy through transmutation. And so we want to look at our attitude afterwards. What happens? If we lose the energy, how did that occur? What happened? What led to that? What's the cause and effect relationship there? Gnosis really dials into cause and effect relationships and says that no effect exists without a cause. So we want to understand what those causes are so that we can change the effects. And in this class, we talked about the cause as attitude. Our attitude is a cause, and what effects does it produce? So if we're working with the transmutation of the creative energy, we need to do the pranayama every day, unless a woman is on her cycle. Every day, do our alternate nostril breathing to transmute the energy. Because otherwise it just builds up. And then the egos, we'll talk about in our upcoming classes, end up stealing that energy. So by transmuting it, you doing pranayama, alternate nostril breathing, we can do runes, we can do lama surya exercises, we can do hamsa, vocalization, or if possible, if we were lucky enough to have a spouse, a person to transmute with, then doing the transmutation practice with them. But we have to do it every day, because that energy is created every 24 hours. That's how our human machine works. And so we want to do our alternate nostril breathing if we have nothing else, or do vocalization. There's certain mantras that can help also with transmutation. But again, we invite you to join us tomorrow for meditation, and before we do the meditation, we do pranayama. So we can practice that together. learn how to use that. The other thing is, in relation to the viewer's question, that there's a lot of energies that we need to clean off of ourselves that come from other people who don't care about their creative energy. A lot of residue from throwing away that creative power. And as a result, if we're beginning to work with that, if we're learning to work with that, one of the things we have to learn how to do is to clean ourselves, and incense plays a role in that. But we'll talk more about that tomorrow. All right, well, thank you guys very much. Don't appear to be any more questions. Appreciate your attention, for hanging in there with us, and hopefully it's been useful. Again, we invite you to join us tomorrow. If not, then next week, same time. We're going to try and continue this series with the 5th part. But in the meantime, we wish you the best in your internal work.